Welcome everyone. My name's Catherine Oldfield. I'm a director in our energy transition business. Thanks for choosing to learn a bit more about what we do. So when you're going through your selection process, we actually sit in financial advisory as one of the options. And within energy transition itself, we're actually split into separate groups. So one focusing on deals, one focusing on risk and reporting, and one focusing on projects. So just a little bit about myself, which I'll bore you with for 5 minutes, just to show that you don't have to have a sustainability or climate change degree to work here. So I started my life as an accountant, working in financial services, actually providing external assurance, then moved into the non-financial assurance space. And then when the energy transition opportunity opened up, decided to focus more on the strategy piece. So it just goes to show, no matter what your degree or background, if you've got an open mind and things like that, more than happy to upskill and learn on the job. So energy transition, what is it? First of all, we focus on decarbonisation. So just to set a base for everyone, so everyone's on the same page, decarbonisation is working with companies to agree to a net zero or lower emission journey. As part of that, we help them through various aspects of it. So if I focus on the deals team first, they do a lot with ESG due diligence. So helping companies understand what ESG strategies they've got in place, any emission components they've got in place, potential for emissions reductions, that type of thing. So they normally come in before a project's about to commence or before a deal's about to go down. So really making sure that future investors or future stakeholders are going to be involved. The next group is our projects team. So they help companies who want to embark on their decarbonisation journey, have an idea, have a project, think of a way to do it, and actually come in and support them both from a legislative but also from a practical perspective. So an example of one of these clients was for a government one where they were looking to reduce their energy consumption or looking to go green in terms of what they were consuming from the grid. So they were looking through solar options, wind options, other green options, and someone amongst business goes, well, wouldn't it be cheaper to actually create our own solar farm? So they did. So we're actually helping them on that journey to go, okay, well, how much energy are you going to contribute to the grid? How much are you going to need to surrender? What's the capital cost? Is it worthwhile? When's it going to pay out? All that type of thing. Then my favourite section, because it's the area I work in, is risk and reporting. So big focus on greenwashing, big focus on ESG strategies, big focus on net zero strategies. So PwC actually ran an analysis over the ASX 200. So if you Google it, ESG trends, PwC, and we looked at the ASX 200 to see what sustainability reporting they were involved. Now, the numbers that came out of this were quite surprising. So 70% of them had an ESG strategy. Great. Only 21% of those actually integrated it into their day-to-day business. So how can you have a separate ESG strategy if it's not integrated around what you're going to do, how you're going to change your operations? So then the third option as well was 36% of them had a net zero strategy. That was it. So all the clients that we're trying to poach and help throughout their journey are those that go, we want a net zero strategy, we want to align to the government targets of net zero by 2050, so zero emissions by 2050, and how are we going to get there? So we focus on this in sort of two different elements. So I'll focus on the ESG strategy part first. So for those who don't know, essentially we work through this in a number of ways. So starting with a materiality assessment. So this involves interacting with different stakeholders to understand what's important to the business. Now that's internal, external, can be done through workshops, can be done through surveys, etc. So once we pull this all together, we then decide on a list of material topics. This gets presented to the business to go, what's important to you? How are you going to pull it together? Then the next question is, well, how do you measure performance? Now this can be done through a number of frameworks. So at the moment in Australia, there is no one framework to fit all in terms of what you must or mustn't report under an ESG strategy. So the ones that we turn to are your International Sustainability Standards Board, which has recently been released. So that sets some guidance in terms of what metrics, targets, setup of reporting you need to put out. Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures, so really focusing on the E of ESG. And the other one is GRI, so Global Reporting Initiative, which sort of sets the baseline for what you need to include and how much detail you need to have. So once we've done that, we then look at what the industry components are to try and pull together a list of metrics that are going to be important for them. The next challenge, which is actually proving to be most challenging at the moment for us, is data quality. So best way to think about it is sustainability standards and non-financial information, sort of where accounting standards were about 15, 20 years ago in terms of what needs to be there, what doesn't need to be there. So what we're helping clients understand is, okay, what data have you got? Is it complete and accurate? Does it accurately reflect what numbers you actually want to put out to the market? And is it actually reliable? So that's the strategy part. The other part that we look at is the net zero. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what's involved in net zero, you have your scope 1 emissions, which is those emissions from your direct operations, scope 2 emissions, which focus on electricity, gas, things like that from the grid, and your third option, which is scope 3. Now, this one's definitely proving the most challenging for all businesses to try and understand because it's very new, the data quality isn't quite there, and there's very differing ways of measuring this across the board. So scope 3 is looking at both your upstream and downstream. So if we take a product in its raw form, you've got to capture the emissions for scope 3 from when it leaves your factory to when it gets to the end user. So all those emissions you've actually got to include in your scope 3 emissions. So trying to gather that data is also what we help our clients do. So it's called emission baselining, essentially. So trying to gather a picture for them to then be able to make insightful decisions on as they go through their journey. So once we've got all that information, we then go, okay, so what are we going to do with this? So then what we look at is discussions with management of what reduction projects they can put in place. So again, is that going the easy option for scope 2, which is looking to green the grid, as we call it, which is starting to focus on, do you have agreements? Are you just going to rely on the grid decarbonising itself? So as the government invests in things that aren't coal, wind, solar, etc., by the nature of it, the grid's going to turn green. So a lot of companies are just waiting for that. Others are going out of their way to buy carbon credits or to buy large generation scale units. So that comes from other solar farms, etc., that sell them to the broader market for them to be able to then consume. So once we've got those options, we sort of piece together a model. Okay, by 2050, if you do nothing, what does that look like? Are you okay with that as an appetite? Now, a lot of companies don't know what they don't know, so then it will go out to a stakeholder thought and process in terms of what they think is acceptable, how ambitious do they want to be, what targets what frameworks do they want to put in place to guide them. So one example of this is SBTI, so science-based targets, which is actually looking at how you change your operation to get to net zero or to decarbonise. So essentially limiting the number of offsets you can and can't purchase. The other alternative for that is what we look at under the climate active or TCFD scenarios, which is then going through and saying, okay, well, this is the information we've got. How can we actually get to net zero and how are we going to do it with offsets? So they're sort of your two options. So climate active is about certifying a product or service to say that it is it is carbon neutral because it's gone through the process to be assured and things like that and have enough carbon credits offset against it. So once we've got those two options, we then present them to management and go, right, what initiatives have you actually got in place? How are you going to do this? What other opportunities have you got in place? So that then starts a whole lot of conversations. What's the capital that needs to be invested? Can they spend the capital? Is it worthwhile? How are they going to get there? That type of thing. So once we've got that, we then provide them with a picture of, okay, this is your baseline, this is your start point. If you do nothing, this is where you'll end up. If you do these three things, this is where you'll end up. So it's about the education piece as well to make sure that you've got the improving data quality as you go through. So then we help them frame up net zero strategy. So if we're going in the alignment of one of the frameworks I mentioned, there's a number of other reporting requirements where you need to outline what exactly is included, how you've defined your boundary. Now, an example of a boundary is for a company that, for example, has subsidiaries. Is it 100% subsidiaries, 50%, etc.? How have you defined what emissions are in and how have you defined what emissions are out? And would your stakeholder at the end of the day who needs this information think the same as you, or would they think that you're misleading them to some degree? I'll pause there. Are there any questions on the multitude of information that I've just given you?
Have there been
That's right, it's on.
Okay.
Yep.
Have there been clients where they have not told you the full truth? Like they try to hide the truth and say that, oh, this is our emissions and all that, but in reality you see that, yeah, they're not keeping up with their targets.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily look at it from an assurance perspective. It's more of an education piece. So when companies aren't necessarily sure of what their emissions profile looks like, that's where we come in to help and essentially interrogate what the business is doing. Are there any emissions that are missing from that perspective? So it's less of a fraud thing and more of a education piece.
Has it been successful? This educating clients saying that, look, you need to try to keep up with your emissions so that, you satisfy the government per se?
Yeah, so I'll take a step back. It's less so the government and more so stakeholders that are going to be invested. So there's a new standard coming out by the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is essentially going to be the equivalent of your accounting standards. So it's going to become mandatory in terms of what needs to be in and out, in terms of your sustainability and emissions reporting. And so therefore, everyone's sort of got a little bit of a rocket up them in terms of making sure their data is complete and accurate before they get to having to report that. The other thing is that there's also directors that are starting to be held personally accountable if the information's correct. So you can't just get away with saying it's a nice, happy story. And what we're actually finding is a lot of companies are trying to disclose the warts and all, and that's actually being better received than those that are trying to hide and paint a green, rosy picture, because we all know that's not the case.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah?
Thank you for sharing. Since ESG is it's a relatively recent phenomenon, what informs your decision when it comes to framework? Is that, do you use your usual consulting past experiences in consulting strategy, or do you consult, for example, like academias in the environmental science field? Like, how do you make that balance?
Great question. So we work in very much a team environment. So like I said, I've got a bit of an accounting and assurance background. So that means that I can bring the lens of understanding what's actually needed from an assurance perspective. What's an auditor going to look like? What they're going to need. So bringing that risk and reporting lens. We then consult with technical experts. So we've got a number in the team that focus on, for example, critical minerals, experts in decarbonisation in the grid. So actually those that have come from industry and understand the bodies, etc. So we really do work collaboratively, that we don't say that we're the one with the only answer. Our teams can be 3 till 7 plus people, depending on the size and the complexity of the project. We also tap into our global network as well. So we've got colleagues in the UK and the US that are obviously a lot further in some of their decarbonisation journeys and options than what we are in Australia. So an example of one of the ones that we work with the UK heavily on is to do with physical risk. So physical risk is looking at if this asset, so if we think about the building we're in, what elements is this going to be exposed to across different scenarios? So you've got, we look at the IPCC, so scenario 1 under that would be essentially everything stays as it is now. We're starting to get some traction, starting to decarbonise, starting to move on that journey. Option 2 is we do nothing in terms of where it's going. And then option 3 is looking at sort of a better case than where we're going at the moment. So what we can do is go, okay, for this building location, across a number of perils, so wind, fire, flood, sea level, hail, etc., what's the likelihood across those different scenarios that this is going to be exposed to a particular risk? So then it helps companies start to plan, right? Because then it's not just about your reporting for your physical risk exposure for a unit, it's actually then forward planning and risk management moving forward as well. So yeah, we work with our UK team who have some data from obviously their sites and then overlay it with what we've got in Australia to be able to give our clients a picture of what risks they're exposed to. Great question. Anyone else? Yeah? Sorry, I've got to hand the mic. No, it's all right.
Does PwC Australia have a sustainability plan for 2030, 2050?
We sure do. We've got a net zero plan to 2050. So that leads me on to our green team. So we don't just walk the walk, we walk the talk, if that's the right way of saying it. So what we actually do is we have a green team that tries to look for new initiatives and ways that PwC and our employees can actually live what they say, decarbonise, zero waste, etc. So, for example, we have ride to work days as an initiative, or in every level we have the waste bins that are separated between green, recycling, actual bins as you go through. We're all strongly encouraged through the facilities that we've got to ride to work or commute to work or share to work with a number of the different benefits that we can get through that. So yeah, we sort of have our own net zero, which is also limiting flying. So there's been, obviously with the COVID, it's also been a good and a bad thing in terms of seeing that we can shift our ways of working. So our idea is that travel is also one of the biggest emitters that we've got when you think about the usage that goes through that. So until that starts to decarbonise as a pathway, there's limitations on travel to essentially be just essential as we go through it. So strongly encouraged, and you've got to have a very strong business case if you want to go down that path. Yeah?
Hi, so I'm more so interested in your journey. So how easy was it? How flexible was it transitioning from accounting opportunity towards consulting, especially in energy?
Yeah, great question.
Within the PwC.
Yeah. So my journey's always been strongly supported. So I was lucky enough to be in ESG assurance before I came across. So like I said, really understanding businesses, in particular that scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. That was sort of my forte before I came across and moved teams. So sort of taking all that knowledge, I was then able to go, okay, well, let's flip it. How would our clients approach this? I've seen some of the challenges in terms of what we look like from an assurance perspective, but how do we help? It's more of an education and more of a support journey in terms of what you've got, what you haven't got from the consulting side. So in terms of work and the opportunity, very supportive, lots of movement in between. And you speak to anyone, and I'm sure you have through your grad panels, that there's lots of exposure and lots of opportunity to internally develop. There's secondments, there's permanent transfers, the whole bit to try and get exposure across teams and across experiences. So in terms of then my learning from the ESG assurance to energy and that, I've been lucky enough to work with a number of utility companies to understand what their challenges are and actually physically go and visit them. So from an assurance perspective, you need to understand the completeness and accuracy of what you're looking at and the boundaries to make sure they're capturing all their emissions. So that actually involved physical site visits. So that was a really unique way to sort of understand it from that side, which now helps me understand that we may not necessarily go to client sites all the time now, but it helps me to really understand what I'm looking at and imagine based on my experience, okay, what would I expect it to look at? What are other things that are missing? Things like that.
Thank you.
That's all right. Anyone else? Got a couple of minutes, yeah?
What do you enjoy the most for this field of the business you're working at?
Oh, great question. So I love that there's no one right answer. So this is such a new field in terms of where we're going and how we're trying to get there. So really helping clients on their journey, but also seeing the positive outcome of that there's actually behavioural change coming through, and it's not just a nice to have, let's stick a green label on it anymore. It's actually trying to have that behavioural change. People want to decarbonise. They want to present more information. They want to be transparent. So being involved in that journey is great, and actually working with clients to understand more about their business, their challenges, things like that as well. So it's not just you come in, you provide a service, you go away. It's actually really exciting to actually see some of these getting published as well. So an ESG strategy or a net zero strategy that we've worked on actually gets released to the public. So all that hard work and all those numbers and things like that you've helped to pull together all gets public as well. So that's kind of cool.
Like sustainability?
Yep, so sustainability reports and ESG strategies and things like that, they all get public. So if you go home and Google, I don't know, your favourite company, be it transport company, be it a logistics, be it manufacturing, makeup, whatever you'd like. If you Google that company in the sustainability report, you'll see everything I'm talking about in terms of ESG or sustainability strategies, if they have one. Like I said, going back to my point earlier, there's only 26% of them that actually do publicly report a net zero strategy. That's all right. Great. Yep, last one.
Yeah, have you ever heard about community renewables? And do you think that would be a pathway to? There will be a pathway to net zero targets.
So the question was community renewables and does it help to net zero pathways?
Exactly.
So we're actually finding that companies are trying to come together and have almost communities of practice, right? Because it's not fair if one company has one answer and the other doesn't. Also, the biggest challenge is if we think about infrastructure, right? That's not going to immediately change overnight in terms of its decarbonisation journey. So you've really got to think about the inputs for that. So things like that is focusing on, okay, well, do we have green steel as an option? Is there green concrete? Can we use alternative fuels? That type of thing in construction that then support it. So there are sort of communities of practice, and that's a huge part of the journey. You can't do it in isolation as a company. It's both upstream and downstream considerations that you need to invoke to make sure the company can reach their decarbonisation targets. Yeah.
What's your take on nuclear for Australia?
Nuclear for Australia. Oh. To be honest, I haven't thought about it that much, but I do know we have a whole hydrogen working group at the moment that's looking to look for options of how they can roll out hydrogen across Australia and solve that as a problem. I know it's not directly nuclear related, and as far as I'm aware, we don't have a nuclear working group, but we definitely do have a hydrogen one that's getting some really cool headway in this space. Like I said, wish I could tell you more about it, but that just goes to show the breadth and depth in our team in terms of what we do and what we cover. Great. That's all right. I think we've got next door.
Can I ask if you back to your, like, you just graduated from your uni, and there is a sustainable department and assurance department that you can choose, which department that you will choose, like your start of your career journey?
That's a tricky question. It depends which organisation in terms of what you're looking at. But the good thing is we actually work very collaboratively with our assurance practice as well. So it's not like if you choose one that you'll never get the opportunity to do the other. There is overlap across the two. So I wouldn't say there's benefits or negatives to one way or another. It's just a different way of looking at it. So the assurance lens very much gave you more about the data, the definitions, the boundaries, descriptions, but more of the consulting side is really about the strategy and the how and solving the problem, if that makes sense.
Okay, one more question.
Yeah.
So from my understanding from PwC strategy, it's more like how to quantify the ESG goals from in companies, right? For their partners and then for any like consulting companies.
So all of our emissions is actually accounted for at an individual level. So it depends on the emission source. But we can cover that afterwards if you like. Yeah. Thanks very much, guys. Hope you got something out of it.